Kia ora tātou. Welcome along. I'm Tara Fagan. I'm Chair of Te Pūtaiaki Manatonga Association of Educators Beyond the Classroom. Great to have you join us today, whether you're watching live with us or you're watching the recording. We'll open with karakia and then we will welcome Naketa, our speaker for today. Whakatakati hau ki te uru, whakatakati hau ki te tonga, kia mākina ki uta, kia mātaratara ki tai. E hi ake ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hohu, tihe Māori ora. Kia ora, welcome everyone. Delighted today to do the second in this series of 4 webinars with Naketa Ikihele. Before I introduce her, this series is really a gift to the sector. So this whole, 16 months of our project running with the project team of Helen, Monica and Mel, we have really focused in on the spaces you work in and the audiences you've worked in. So we've focused a lot in on good curriculum practice, working with young students across the sector, looking at cultural and heritage practice. And we wanted to finish with something for you. So looking at your own, empowering yourself, really, to think about different ways of working and ensuring you've got a voice with the work that you're doing. So we're delighted that Naketa Ikihele, who is an experienced coach and facilitator, has come along to do this work with us and for us. Now, Naketa is an international coach and facilitator with the International Coaching Federation, or is an International Coaching Federation associate with certified coaching. And she is the founder of Kia Mahira, Be Curious, a professional learning and development firm. I've worked with Naketa, or known Naketa, for a number of years, and she is incredibly inspiring with the work that she does for people and just an all-round, absolutely awesome human. So we're so lucky to have her come and be part of this series for us. Today's series is the series of 2 of 4. We're looking at understanding your influence. And at that point, I'm just going to hand it on over to Naketa to start us off for today. Kia ora, Naketa.
Kia ora, thanks Tara, thanks everybody for taking time out of your busy schedule to join me. I'm just going to pop up my slides and get started. And so, it's a real honor and privilege to talk to you all about understanding your influence. And one of the reasons why this is an important topic, one of the things I do in my role, I'm an international coach, so I coach leaders from all around the world, literally. My most recent one yesterday was in Ivory Coast. And so I do a lot of work working with people around understanding who they are. Ko waio, who am I? And today I really want to just delve into a model that has been around since 2008. Very rarely, though, is it applied. And what I notice is a lot of the tools and resources, frameworks that we see widely used in the corporate and executive settings are not necessarily transferred into education, more government, non-profit settings. And so I like to be the person that brings it all across and shares it widely. And this is just one of the models that has been around in the executive space for a very long time that I would like to gift koha you today to support you in understanding your influence, but also understanding the impact you can have on your own lives and the lives of others. And the whakatauaki, so whakatauaki is when we understand who the author is, from Maya Angelou, that was shared in the abstract of our kōrero today, was you have no idea what your legacy will be, because your legacy is every life you touch. And in the work that you do, you absolutely touch lots of lives in any given day. And I've been really honored and privileged to work with some of you more closely in a coaching space where I see the hearts and the responsibility that you have in surfacing the voices for those that, the taonga, that don't have a voice of their own. And so honored and privileged to be here sharing with you today, looking at the kaupapa, understanding your influence. So the work that I'm presenting to you is of David Rock. So David Rock is a neuroscientist who has brought a lot of his learning into the executive leadership space. He founded an organization that looks specifically at neuroscience, neuro leadership. And the book that is the most accessible in terms of really quite easy to read is Your Brain at Work. And again, it's nearly 15 years old, but still relevant to how we live our lives today. So for those of you that attended our last webinar, you'll know, well, you do know now, I'm a bit of a book geek, so I love reading books. And what I do is I capture my favorite quotes from books and I put them freely for you to use and share on my website. So these are some of my favorite quotes from his book that have influenced my understanding of leadership, but particularly neuro leadership. So what is the impact on of our brain and the way that we show up in the world? And so the model that I'll share today is called the SCARF model. And it is a brain-based model for collaborating with and influencing others. And so when we look at the SCARF model, it is an acronym, and I'll be sharing that acronym, but I think it's also one of the things that I want to really emphasize here is that it is based on 5 social domains. And we look at social domains, understanding that the way we act or receive cues socially impact our fight or flight response. And so when we look at neuroscience, we're looking at what is the threat, minimizing risk or threats, and maximizing reward. And I'll explain that further, but to help provide a bit of a framework, I've worked with a number of people who just like give me the framework, and then so you can hang the ideas and thoughts off. So the framework is SCARF, and it stands for status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And these are the 5 social domains that David Rock suggests help us stay motivated as humans, or demotivate us as humans. And so when we look at unpacking, I'll just get you to pop yourselves on mute, just so you just so people can hear us. So when we look at SCARF, and I'll explain these more, but it's, I know in terms of where I'm leading to with this presentation is that to not treat others how you want to be treated, but to treat them how they want to be treated. Okay, so for me personally, I'm just an ideas person, I'm a vision person. I just want to give all the ideas, but I understand that some people need the framework first so that they can hang the whakaaro, the kōrero under it. So when we look at SCARF, just quickly, we will go into these more. We look at S standing for status, and we're looking at our relative importance to others. Okay, these are very quick descriptions. I will go into these in more depth. C is certainty, so our ability to predict the future. A is autonomy and our sense of control over events. R is relatedness, so how safe we feel with others. So these, you'll have your own, what your brain's doing now is you're making connections to what does this mean for me? When I say relatedness, for those of you that come from education or even in the work you're doing, you'll automatically think of belonging or whakawhanaungatanga or community. So your brain is already making connections with, okay, what does this mean for me in my world, in my context? And then we have F, which is fairness, how fair we perceive the exchanges between people to be. So when we look at the purpose of this framework, much of our motivation or inspiration behind social behavior is governed by an overarching principle: minimize threats, maximize reward. Okay, so minimize threat, maximize reward. That's basically what the basic function of your brain. And our social needs are treated in the brain in much the same way as we need food and water. So minimize threat and maximize reward. generally, the safer and happier we feel, the better we perform. The safer and happier we feel, the more motivated we are. And so understanding this framework not only helps us in the work that we do, but it helps us influence out. And a lot of the work I do in leadership coaching, it is really about self-awareness. It's really about understanding, because I've worked all over. I've worked in spaces all over the world, but particularly in an international school where there's up to 62 different nationalities. What I come to learn from that experience is that the basic kōwaio that we see as a fundamental value in Te Ao Māori is essential. And so the work that I'm sharing with you today is I'm inviting you to apply this and think, what does this mean for me? And I will invite you to answer questions that are relevant to you and helping you surface in your self-awareness around what does this mean for me. But before I hit each of the SCARF acronym, I really want to just provoke our thinking around what is the basic fundamental operation. So you may understand Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where he suggests that our basic function is water, sleep, physiological needs. That's what we absolutely need. And then we need to feel a sense of safety, love and belonging, self-esteem, and self-actualization. Well, recently that's been a bit debunked. Okay, so Maslow's hierarchy of needs absolutely is true and correct, but what we see now and what we understand about the brain and how it works is, yes, we need satisfaction of physiological needs like food, sleep, clothes, breathing, and we need safety and security, but actually the biggest part is purpose, that we need purpose in life, that we need to feel like we're fulfilling something, and a will to live, and a connection, love, and belonging. And the most chronic pandemic right now is isolation and loneliness. So if basic needs are being met, food, sleep, water, the most chronic pandemic is loneliness and not feeling a part of something. And so the theory is that you need to feel a part of something, and SCARF is a model that helps us click in to the social domains, to the vital social domains of how we show up in the world. And so I'm inviting you to look at SCARF, to turn a mirror on yourself and think purely from your perspective, what does this mean for me? And what does this look like for me? So we're moving away from treat others how you want to be treated, to treat yourself how you want to be treated, understand how you want to be treated, and to treat others how they want to be treated. And that will become clear as I walk through the steps of the SCARF acronym or framework. So SCARF is the first one is status, and what this really comes down to though is your value in the world, because I think we're moving away from hierarchy as being, to a more collective efficacy, a more collaborative approach to leadership. How I would repurpose this for Aotearoa New Zealand context is value. So your sense of personal worth and where you are in relation to others. So David Rock talks about the perception of a potential or real reduction in value or status can generate a strong threat response. And he talks about his research on social rejection. So Rock talks about that a hit to your value or your status can light up the same regions of the brain as physical pain. So when you are rejected or your value is decreased by an action, that the same sparks light up in your brain that are related to actual physical pain. So what we understand now is our social is just as important as the physical. The social is just as important as the physiological. And so The layout of this webinar is really going to look at what is the acronym, what is the point, and then what does it look like when we activate the reward, which is what brain science is about. It's maximizing reward, decreasing risk. So when we're activating the reward in the status framework, we're looking at pulling in feedback, public acknowledgement, identifying what value or superpowers you bring to the space, and wins of the week. So these are ideas for activating the reward. But like I say, treat others how they want to be treated, not how you want to be treated. For me, public acknowledgement is that would be the worst thing you do for me in a workspace. Like humility is one of my core values. And if you were to put me up on a pedestal and say, "Oh, Naketa, you did so amazing. Look how great you are," I would be mortified. Like that would not be cool for me. But for others, that might be. And so, firstly, I am inviting you to look at, if you were to look at status or value, what would activating a reward look like for you? And for some, it might be internal, like being able to share what value you bring to the space, or regularly reflecting on your wins of the week. Okay, and then to activate risk, we're looking at critique, unsolicited advice. And so you know, when somebody, so in the coaching world, advice is a big no-no. We look at advice is any advice. We call it the Michael Bungay Stanier talks about the advice trap, and I talked about his books in our last webinar. But looking at when we offer advice, we're actually saying that what I know is more important than what you know, and so you're giving it. But when it's unsolicited, that's when it's when you're activating risk, is like you're setting others up to feel undervalued. So activating risk in the status is feeling undervalued, feeling underappreciated, and heavy reliance on external praise. Okay, so these are all things that activate risk in the status section. And so some reflective questions for you is really about understanding how you feel valued. And so it might be an easy question for some, but I actually, in the work I do, you often don't get time to acknowledge how you feel valued. So for me, all I need for acknowledgement is a thanks, that was great. I don't need a big speech or a big spiel. I just need a little acknowledgement, and then I just want to get on with the business. And for you, it's different. For you, it will look and feel differently based on who you are as a person. And so in this session, I really just invite you to explore, when I feel valued, when I felt valued, what does this look like for me? Because as soon as when you can do the work on yourself, you are better able to articulate it out to others. So helping others treat you the way you want to be treated, but you're also clear on what triggers the status, right? What maximizes that risk. Other reflective questions: what do I understand about the hierarchy in my current workplace? Is there a hierarchy? You know, as much as we say that we're a flat structure, you know, sometimes espoused theory versus action theory is quite different. And how does this impact on my role as educator? And so a lot of the work that Michael Bungay Stanier talks about is, he talks about rank. And so when you are in your role as educator, how do you balance out the status with the akunga that you're working with, the learners that you're working with? How do you balance out status or rank with your colleagues? And so these are just reflective questions for you to think about in understanding yourself. And so when we look at understanding your influence, the biggest influence you have is on yourself. And because you can control you can't control what others do. You can control you and how you react to others. And so this work is really about looking at yourself first, and then looking at how you might treat others the way they want to be treated. Okay, so please feel free to chuck questions in the chat. Any comments, if I'm going too fast or need to speed it up, just let me know. The next one is certainty, our ability to predict the future. And what that looks like is having an understanding or a sense of what the future holds for us. And it's being able to make accurate predictions about the future. And so if we look at AUT right now, they're about to release 250 jobs. And that's relevant to me because my supervisor is one of the is an AUT. My current supervisor for my thesis is an AUT employee, and so I understand not wholly, but I understand the impact that that's having out, the influence out. And so when we look at risk, minimizing risk, and maximizing reward, not knowing if you have a job by December 1st doesn't help. It really, really maximizes risk and threat. And so when we look at this in the context of you and how we might take this on to raise our own self-awareness, we look at clear expectations, setting clear goals, realistic project schedules, and then understanding, which is what I see a lot in my work as a leadership coach, is it a knowledge, skill, or will gap? Because sometimes if we are not clear on what needs to be done, there's either a knowledge, skill, or will gap. And clarifying that, is it something that we can help the person with, or is it something they don't want help with? And then activating reward is also asking questions, but creating the culture that questions are promoted or emphasized. The famous quote by Brené Brown is clear as kind, unclear as unkind. Spelling mistake there. Clear as kind, unclear as unkind. And it really is about clarity. And most of the work I do, understanding clarity or understanding what your role is, understanding what you are there to do, understanding what the targets are, really helps people perform. And so when we activate risk, we're looking at lack of transparency, dishonesty, unpredictability. And when this is in play, so we're looking at SCARF. If the SCARF model is functioning, the 5 social domains are functioning, you get higher motivation, higher performance. So when it's not functioning, it means people tend to slow down and hesitate. Procrastination, if you are not clear on what needs to be done next, then you're guaranteed procrastination or avoidance entirely, or disengagement. And so being very clear and explicit about what the outcomes are. And so, and this is something that in terms of your work and your place of work, but also your role as educators, in that it's okay to repeat the aims or goals of the presentation, or aims or goals of what you're about to repeat that several times, so it's clear and explicit of what the intention of the day is. And looking at it from your perspective, what do you need in terms of certainty? So are you clear on your current job? Do I have a job description? What could be more explicit in my workplace? I don't know if you've walked into, if you walk into a place, particularly if you've done a lot of traveling and you're just like, what is going on here? That certainty raises that risk and threat and minimizes that reward. And so you notice your body, the shifts in your body when you're not clear on what's happening, or when you've been thrown into a space that you have no idea what's happening, that increases the cortisol for your brain. And so there's likely to be less motivation, less productivity. And then, one of the things that I encourage some of the people I work with in terms of leadership coaching, what are 3 essential things people should know about your role? It really is to provide that clarity around what your job is. And so when we don't have clarity around what we're doing, we're less productive, less motivated. So clarity or certainty is the second part of the scaffold. And then we move into autonomy. So autonomy is our sense of control over events. And so when we look at yeah, autonomy, I think, is a big one, particularly for the work that you do, given that there are other moving parts in this space of culture and heritage. And so really autonomy as a definition is about having the power to exert control over your environment, the freedom to make choices. When you have autonomy, you're empowered to take action and highly motivated. Okay, and so what that looks like in terms of activating reward is providing or having choices, and real choice, I would say, providing or having real choices, or and gifted leadership opportunities. I like to have a play on language sometimes. When we look at delegation, autonomy, when you think about autonomy, having the freedom of choice to share responsibility, or having freedom of choice to delegate, when we reframe delegation to gifted leadership opportunities, or I'm gifting you leadership opportunities, then you feel like you have a choice. But really it's not. So delegation, but when we look at activating reward, is having the choice to take on leadership opportunities, having the conversation around whether you want to take on more responsibility or not, having responsibility over how your day looks. And I've moved from using the word empowerment, because in a lot of this, particularly in education, we're really good at saying, I empower others. But the fact of the matter is, you can't empower others. Empowerment is a word that's been used a lot. When we look at empowerment, it's about, as individuals, having authority over self, having the authority to say yes or no in any given situation, having the choice as to whether you want to take on responsibility or not. And so some of these points may be triggering or provocative. And so the purpose for me sharing this is not to disrupt where you currently are. It might be affirming for you. You might have great autonomy, but it really is based on the brain-based model of SCARF and that autonomy. And what does that mean for you? And that's what I encourage you to do, is look at, what does autonomy mean for you? So what it doesn't look like is micromanagement. And so this is where I invite you to think about, to treat others how they want to be treated. Some people like being micromanaged. Some people like being told what they need, what needs to happen next. And in the next webinar, I will talk about that, and that understanding that not everybody wants to have free reign. I'm personally someone that does like to have free reign. Just give me a topic and I present on it. Thank you very much to the educators here. But some people don't like that. And so understanding what you need and like around autonomy, and noting that, but then understanding what your people need from you in terms of autonomy. They may not want free reign, and they may need more structure and clarity in place. And the constant authoritative leadership, like looking at authoritative leadership is not necessarily a bad thing, but it is when it restricts autonomy, and then restriction and ideation. So what that means is, and I've seen it a number of times, where you come up with these great ideas and they're just not heard. And that's kind of the thrust behind my whole thesis around listening, is being able to share ideas and having them acknowledged, not necessarily picked up, but just acknowledged and heard. And when we look at autonomy, that is certainly part of how we might make people feel more autonomous. And the challenge for you today is to look at, what do I need to feel autonomous? Like, what is living my best life look like in terms of my current role, and being autonomous? And do I have do I have what I need to be creative? And that's the consequence. If there is a restriction of ideation, if there is a restriction on authority over self, then creativity and innovation is the first to go. And so those are the reflective questions. How much creativity do I have in my role? How much does what I do align with my strengths and values? And so in a lot of the leadership work I'm doing now, it really is about living in alignment, about what is your purpose, what are your values, what are you good at? Go there, you know. And that might challenge some of you in terms of what we think work should be. But we will get the best out of people if they are living in alignment with their purpose, alignment with their values, and shared alignment with the vision and the kaupapa of the organization. And how much control do I have in my job? And this is another, see, autonomy is a big one, because it really is, how long is a piece of string in terms of how autonomous you want to be. Not everyone wants free reign, and not everyone wants to be hugely scaffolded or restricted. So firstly, the challenge is to understand what you need to be most motivated, most productive, most happy. What does happy look like? And understanding that for yourself, and then looking at how that can push out and influence out to others. So, and do I have too much control that there's no clarity? You know, when you have given too much autonomy, you know, sometimes it doesn't quite align with organizations. And I found myself in this situation a number of times where I sort of go full out there, visionary, out the box. And it doesn't actually fulfill the purpose of what the organization is trying to achieve. And sometimes you do need to be reined in. And then relatedness, how safe we feel with others. So we might reframe this in Aotearoa as whakawhanaungatanga, as a sense of belonging. We might reframe it as collectiveness or collaboration. But what this looks like is, you know, that real sense of belonging, how we might activate, how we might support relatedness in an organization is creating that sense of belonging. You know, and I think one thing we just assume, particularly in Aotearoa, that, oh yeah, we make everyone feel a sense of belonging. But I remember in a contract I was doing for the Ministry of Education, and I walked into, you know, a centre, an early childhood centre, and you would typically think that because belonging is one of the fundamental things that our early childhood curriculum is based on, you would typically think that I would feel a sense of belonging there. I walked in as a ministry representative into a centre, and I walked past 4 adults before someone said hello. And so I challenge you to think, you know, where do you feel a sense of belonging, and what happened to make it so? In a cafe, in a new workplace, in a space in your current workplace, in your house. I've got teenagers and they just give one word, highs and buys right now. And then we can activate the reward part of the brain by mentoring, right? So kind of taina partnerships. And I think when we look at induction or having new people come on board, is there a formal process where we are tracking them for more than just the first day into the organization? Is there a formal induction or process where we are making people feel a sense of belonging? Do they have somebody? And then connections with colleagues, and how we minimize or how we activate risk is that lack of shared purpose. He waka ke noa is probably the best whakatauki that sums it up, that everyone on the same waka towards the same goal. And that's, I do a lot of work on with teams around collective efficacy, collective goals, and the fundamental part of it is what is the vision of your organization, and do you know what it is, and are you all paddling towards it? And then fostering internal competition is an activate risk. Some people like that. Like, I've got a teenage daughter who's just shared this most amazing, outlandish, outlavish Christmas competition that her work is doing. Like, that totally would not float my boat, but they're all really young employees. It totally flies for them. And so not treating people the way you want to be treated, but treating them how they want to be treated is kind of when we look at understanding your influence. Comparing to others, I'm not sure if you've had that experience, but I certainly have as a primary school teacher, when somebody will say to you, oh, so-and-so is doing this and they're so great. Well, that's nice. Well, that's one way to activate risk and threat in a person. And then lack of opportunity to interact. In the book Culture Code, so it's all about the top 500 organizations and how they create a positive work culture. The number one key influence over culture was rubbing shoulders, like literally, or virtually. Rubbing shoulders. Time to rub shoulders together was the number one key influence of ensuring that the culture of an organization was positive. And so we saw in the research that they shared in the book, the Culture Code, they looked at even the ways environments are set up. So they moved all of the furniture to the outside of the room and created more opportunities for rubbing shoulders. And that increased the collective efficacy and collaborativeness of the team by a significant amount, like so significant that it overwhelmed the researchers. So when we look at activating risk, it really is about that lack of opportunity to interact. And in a lot of the work that I do, it is the fluffy stuff. So is the whakawhanaungatanga, is the stuff that is not productive in terms of maybe the outcomes, but essential for the relatedness part of our social domain, for that feeling of belonging. And then another activating risk is that feeling of isolation, and which is, you can see the shifts. You can see the shifts in environments and that rubbing shoulders concepts, and that we're moving away from partitioned kind of silo offices to more open space. But that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to fix the feeling of isolation. So my invitation to you today is not to change everything, but really turn the mirror on yourself and think, when do I feel like I'm moving on to the slide. When do I feel I can bring my whole self to work? Like, when do you feel like you can turn up truly as you? And then who do I connect with at work? What is the reaction to a sick day? That's telling. And then how do I establish relationships with colleagues, learners, and akonga? And really understanding that. I have the luxury of teaching or working with people from all around the world, and there's no right answer to these. The right answer is what you need, but taking the time to figure out what it is you need, because we don't give ourselves permission to really turn the mirror on ourselves. When you are particularly in your roles, you are so busy serving, giving. And so I'm inviting you, I'm challenging you, I'm encouraging you, turn the mirror back on yourself just for a bit and ask yourself, what do I need to feel an increase in relatedness? What do I need what's the way I work best when establishing relationships with a new group of children that are coming in? And then the last one on our SCARF model is fairness. And so when we look at that, we look at, it's regardless of the fairness or unfairness of life. When it comes to day-to-day interactions, maintaining the perception of fairness is important when it comes to motivating people. And in the brain research, unfairness, when we see something that is unfair, you have the same reaction as being disgusted. So the body and the brain, if you see something that is unfair in your eyes, the perception of unfairness, it's the same reaction as disgust. And so we can see how socially and physiologically that those are so intertwined. When we look at activating reward and fairness, being transparent with our decisions, and I guarantee all of you can think of a time where something was unfair, where you felt like that's not cool. And take note of how your body reacted to that, where that sits in your body and how it showed up in the world. And so unfairness is the same as disgust. But what to activate the reward part of fairness, we want to look at being transparent with decisions, open communication, candidness, clear rules, equity. And so only you know what that felt like in your body when something was unfair, and what you consider to be fair. And you know, I do a lot of work on values when around the world. I do a lot of work on values, and fairness comes up strongly. And like you've said there, Kieran, it's usually from something that happened in childhood. I encourage people, when I look at values, to track back the whakapapa of why that's important. And so fairness usually comes back to an incident that happened in your childhood that may have been a blip on somebody else's system. Like, your parents won't even know that they traumatized you in this way, but for you, it was such a significant moment that really taught you that the world is not fair. And so how we see that show up in the world is, I'm asking, you know, very experienced educators, what are your core values? And then they will say fairness. And then you can see them whakapapa right back to their childhood of something that happened. And so, you know, no pressure as a parent, to not turn up and, you know, try and make your kids not be traumatized by something that wasn't fair. But it's a very interesting how fairness is related to the same body, physiologically, brain, as discussed. And so fairness, when we look at that in the context of the SCARF model, and we look at the activating risk, is unequal treatment, unclear rules and guidelines, lack of communication. But for those of you in the culture and heritage space, I feel like this weighs heavier on you more than most, because you are in the privileged position of sharing stories of unfair, or of sharing voices, the voice of taonga, or people or resources that don't have a voice of their own. And so you take it on more than most, the fairness element of the social, you take on that accountability more than most. And so acknowledge that that's a privilege and honor, but a huge responsibility, and to be kind to yourselves in this space, because, you know, we thank you, the rest of the country, the rest of the world, thank you for the work that you do, but I do know that it doesn't come without its heaviness. And so to be kind and graceful to yourselves, particularly in this fairness, unequal treatment space. And so when we look at, okay, and so why has Naketa shared all of these things? What I want to do is remind you that the understanding influence starts with you, and to be kind to yourselves, and to turn that mirror on yourselves just for a little bit and ask yourselves, what does status look like for me? How do I seek value and feel valued? What does certainty look like? Autonomy, relatedness, and fairness look like? And with the understanding that this is a brain-based model. But what it does in terms of showing up in the world, actually, when there is increased risk, you have decreased cognition, reduced working memory, but it also, what you see is you are less creative, because you are so busy, the fight or flight, you're so busy trying to survive, even though the threats might not be as significant as life or death, they are still threats, and they are still sending messages to your brain. When it's overpowered, you are less likely to be a problem solver or creative or thinking, and then the small stresses are more likely to be perceived as large stresses. Okay, so, and then increased pessimism. So these are not conducive to living your best life. These things are not conducive to you being happy. These are not conducive to you being more resourceful or being more motivated. And so when we look at the SCARF model, the best gift you can give to yourselves is to understand what works for you and to articulate that out. Articulate it out so that others are clear on what works for you and what doesn't. This is what I need to turn up as my best self. And I have done this in a number of spaces and have coached some amazing women who've then gone home to their partners and told them what they need. So I'm not encouraging that. I'm not taking any responsibility for that. But when you can articulate what you need to turn up as your best self, you make it a lot easier for people to treat you the way you want to be treated, and not the way they want to be treated. Okay, and so that leaves me with another Maya Angelou quote that is fuzzy, but she talks about, this is probably one of her most famous ones, where people will forget what you said, people forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And understanding your influence is about understanding yourself first and foremost. That's what you can do. It starts with knowing yourself, and then it's about treating people the way they want to be treated. But you can't do that unless you are full in your cup. And you can't do that unless you know what you need, and then work out, influence out that way. And so that's my whittle. My challenge for you is to turn the mirror, take a beat for yourself for a minute, and look at what do you need for status or value? What do you need for certainty or clarity? What do you need for autonomy? What do you need for relatedness or belonging? And what do you need for fairness? And so that brings me to the end of my kōrero. If you have any questions, please do feel free to get in contact with me on any of these platforms, and I would happily continue the conversation with you. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you so much, Naketa. Another amazing session. And for those of you that joined in after we had started, what we said, we've done so many webinars over the course of this year, and it's been fantastic to bring some guest speakers in, have you guys share your practice. But it's all been about our practice, about our work, about the akonga, the teachers that we serve, and our spaces. But these 4 sessions with Naketa are designed for us. And there's so much powerfulness and richness come out of your kōrero today, Naketa, that I'm going to spend ages unpicking some of that. Like it's like a personal coaching session that I think, we can go back and watch a webinar and come back to some of those prompts time and time again and work on it. Really rich and lovely to have that. And hopefully it's prompted some food for thought for those of you tuning in, whether live or in the recording, and something that you can work on over the holiday period, and just think about the way that we can turn up to be our best selves. So really want to acknowledge the session today, Naketa, and your work. Thank you. I am spending a fortune on books, can I just say. I went and bought How to Begin from your webinar last week. I can see I'm going away to buy this week's book as well. So I'll have my summer reading poll sorted out for me. But if you don't follow Naketa on Instagram too, actually it's really great because she puts new books up on the time. Sometimes I get them, sometimes I don't, but now I feel invested in them. And if you want to keep your bank balance healthy, maybe don't follow Naketa on Instagram, because you'll be like me and buy all your books instead. Anyhow, let me get back to business. Thank you again, Naketa. We've got Naketa coming to us again in a fortnight, Thursday the 17th of November, 3:30 to 4:30 again, where she's going to give us insight into different communication models. So as I said, all these series is about for us, and thinking about us and our needs, and the communication session will be that similar framework as well. And so yeah, invite you all to come along for that. And as always, if you can't attend live, the recording will be available on our website. So on that note, we will close with karakia. Whakatakati hau ki te uru, whakatakati hau ki te tanga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, I hea ki ana ti atakura, he teo, he hoka, he hohu, ti hei Māori ora. Wishing you all a wonderful rest of the week, and we will see you again in a fortnight. Ka kite.